The purpose of this conversation is to inspire people that despite whatever circumstances that they found themselves in, find themselves in, or fear that they will, that here's somebody who your experience arguably, they're right up there. I mean, you had a tough time. So We've talked about the bad. We've talked about your, let's just call it an incredible ascendance through those circumstances. And now let's turn to exploration again. Today, you are a lot of things. You're an explorer, and you just said exploration is curiosity in action. And one thing I've heard you say that I love is that somebody's going over that waterfall in a barrel. And I would think that maybe it's been you, metaphorically, a time or two. You've sailed the Beagle Channel. You've climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. You've dived 16,000 feet deep in the Bermuda Triangle. You've recovered artifacts from the Titanic. You've led expeditions that found and recovered the Apollo F-1 engines that launched those men to the moon. So let's make a shift and talk about your first trip to the Titanic in 2000. Sure. You said that you can look at a photo of the Titanic and tell us where that is on the ship. How did you prepare for that first dive, and why?
So backing up for background, I was been on 5 Titanic expeditions. I was supposed to be on 6. One was in 2023. And I was supposed to make my 5th dive to the Titanic on June 18th, 2023 in a submersible called Titan as the subject matter expert. I was called away by another client matter 36 hours before my departure, and I couldn't go. So set the table that way. But in 1998, I was asked to help a gentleman by the name of Don Walsh. Don Walsh had made the deepest dive in history to the Marianas Trench in 1960 with a legal case over access to the Titanic. And it was about the right to explore and intellectual property rights and whether explorers could explore historic shipwrecks and go. And exploration is paid for through the licensing of intellectual property rights. It's mostly private exploration, unless you just write a check if you're wealthy, or you work for a government and they write a check. So I never dreamt that I would ever go to the Titanic. I never dreamt that I would, not because a moonwalker told me I wouldn't, but because I didn't see a path to do that, doing what I was doing. Although I was an expert, in small quotes, in the law as it related to underwater exploration and shipwrecks. So I was involved with exploration of underwater and finding and recovering shipwrecks. But through happenstance, I became a member of the Explorers Club. I became their general counsel very rapidly. I was one of the youngest members in the world, and I was certainly the youngest person in the boardroom. But Don Walsh asked me to help him with this case where he was named as a defendant. Long story short, I won the case, took it up to the United States Supreme Court, won. And the company I beat turned around and hired me to organize their expedition to the Titanic in 2000 to recover artifacts. And I immediately hired all the people they had sued that were my clients. All the defendants that I represented were now doing the expedition and getting paid by the company that we had beat in litigation, which was hilarious. But I thought this was never going to happen. This is like, lightning doesn't strike twice. So, and I don't like to fail at things. So I did a lot of preparation. I knew that every hour in the sub, it's, first of all, to set the table, the Titanic is 2.5 miles deep. At the time, there were only 3 submersibles in the world that were capable of going there, maybe 4, and only 2 that were available to the public, to the commercial sector. And so more people have stood on the summit of Mount Everest in a single day this month in May than have ever seen the Titanic underwater. And this was 24 years ago, so it was even lower then. And so this was a rare opportunity. This was not even, there's 600 or 700 people have gone to space, but 100 people at that time, maybe less, had seen the Titanic underwater. And so I didn't, part of the deal was I got to dive. I was getting a dive. And so I studied and studied and studied and studied for 6 months before I went. And we studied hundreds of hours of footage of the wreck site and the debris field. The Titanic wreck site is 5 square miles on the bottom, which isn't well known. And so we were there to recover artifacts, and we were there to recover artifacts that were necessary for the public exhibitions that went around the world. And we had a lot of egg plates, but we didn't have things like representations of third-class female passengers. So I studied maps and film and photographs so that I could navigate underwater in a space where at the time, and still today, you're really walking around a 5 square mile area with a flashlight. It's very, very important to know where you are. And because you'd like to come up and not get stuck there, which has happened to me. And B, because you need to make the most of this time. And through that studying, I became very, very well versed in exactly where things are on the bottom in the wreck site, and little clues like there's things called rusticles that look like rust that you can see. They're very famous when you look at a photo of the Titanic. Well, those rusticles always point north because of the prevailing currents. It's the secretions from bacteria that are eating away at the iron ore in the steel. They eat a half a ton of iron ore every day. And they secrete these, it's actually poop. So it's not rust, but they always point north. So you can always navigate on the bottom based on the way that the rusticles are pointing. That's a tip. And, you use things like I learned at camp, time and distance. So we have a compass, and the compasses work underwater, GPS doesn't. And, you get a sense to orient yourself to where things are on the wreck site to know where you are and not get stuck or lost. You have to know if something's pointing to the west, what's to the west. And then you measure speed and time, and you can tell how far you've traveled. Old school navigation techniques. But it was important always to know where you are and in what area, so that if we had a list of things that were important to recover and where you would most likely find them. So I taught myself pretty much to recognize everything. And navigation on the bottom is a very, very challenging thing. Extremely challenging. And finding your way around. When I was an advisor to Ocean Gate, they would often miss the bow. They get to the stern, but they would miss the bow entirely. And that's what the people want to see. They want to see the bow. They don't want to see the stern and the debris field. They want to see the bow. But they would miss it a lot. So I learned, I can look at a photo and I can tell you which way north is, and I can tell you what if these tiles with their first or second class kitchen are, and if the small black objects are coke, which was used in the ovens in the first and second class dining room, versus coal, which is a large boulder, which is different, which is brown, and coal is black. And I just taught myself how to do this. And so that's one of the reasons why I was supposed to be the subject matter expert in Titan on June 18th. Because we can navigate. It's probably going to be the only dive of the year. And, it was important to find the bow. So, and so I've covered the 5 square miles on the bottom. I've led the last expedition using the Mir submersibles, the Russian Mirs, set up all the dive plans in 2000. And so this was just how I prepared myself for what I expected to be a one-off, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity of limited duration where I was going to make the most of it.
And yet you've gone back 5 times, even though you say if you've done it once, that's enough.
Well, I only go there for work, and I don't like it there at all.
Why?
It's a spooky place. I believe it's haunted. It's a very somber place to be. It's like going to the World Trade Center on the day after 9/11. You don't realize that on your first dive. On your first dive, there's too many emotions. I call it a 12-hour blind date, where you experience everything: anticipation, elation, sadness, boredom, fear. And so your first dive, top to bottom is only 12 hours, and you compress a lot in that 12-hour time period, and it's really a lot of sensory overload. so that it doesn't have an opportunity to sink in. When you're on the shipwreck, you're always looking at, like, where am I? You're always asking yourself, where am I? What am I looking at? What is that? Is that Captain Smith's bathtub? Is that Molly Brown's stateroom? Is that the Marconi room? By the way, there's a cable that can trap me here and keep me here for the rest of my short, miserable life, which is 2 days at that time. And, so you're always aware of obstacles and where things are, and so you have a lot to do. And you don't experience the gravity of it. I didn't on your first dive. The house falls on you on your second dive. That's when you're looking out at the devastation and the shoes and the debris and the. I met with Jim Cameron for one of the times, and I said, at the time he had never been to the stern. He filmed the movie Titanic. I think he did 12 dives, and he only did them on the bow. And I said, and I had been there. And I said, why just the bow? He said, the story of the ship is in the bow. I said, yeah, but the story of the sinking is in the stern. And he took that to heart, and he went to the stern on the next dive. I don't think he uses that quote now, but I had spent a lot of time in the stern, and it's very, very, very depressing and somber.
So I do want to briefly touch on the topic of Ocean Gate and the loss of the submersible.
Sure.
And just to acknowledge for all those paralegals listening, we are not going to talk about it any further. You were engaged with the team at the time. You were engaged to recover assets. Beyond that, I think we're going to really limit the conversation because we could probably talk about that for days as well. And we're not going to.
Yeah, I'll say this for the audience that's listening. I was an advisor to Ocean Gate for 6 years, and specifically on legal and operational issues as it relates to exploration at the Titanic. I was not the company's lawyer. I did not design the sub. And I had less involvement with them. Yeah, I lost 3 friends that day, and I was called, and because of my experience in deep sea exploration, and I was asked to organize a rescue when the sub was overdue, and when the thought was that the sub was trapped, and that although I knew that there was evidence of an implosion within 12 hours, nobody on the Polar Prince knew that. And the only thing I'll say about that experience was I can't prove a case based on hearsay, and I'm not going to tell Wendy Rush to come in because her husband's dead based on a rumor that's unconfirmed. However, I will say I'm still angry about it because the United States government never, ever, ever attempted a rescue, despite what they said. They never sent rescue equipment to the site, and they wouldn't allow Ocean Gate to send rescue equipment to the site. Period. They never did it. And that the 96-hour clock that we all were living by and everything was all false. The families were misled. And they didn't do it because, in my opinion, they knew that the sub had imploded. They could have said that on the Monday the 19th, but they didn't. They had to mislead us and create false hope. And then the families found out that their loved ones were dead from CNN. But that's cruel and unnecessary.
Let's shift to, you did a job for Jeff Bezos. You have said it was a team effort. You have not taken credit, but certainly you were responsible for the remains of the Apollo 11 engines and for bringing them to the surface. I'd kind of like to hear a little bit about that and why you did it.
Well, let's go back. Again, I like to always give a backstory. I got exactly the credit I wanted. I asked for. I was actually in my contract that I would get the credit, but we worked out what the credit was. I led the entire effort. I took it from an idea to reality, but I wasn't out there alone in a canoe. And I had 105 people working for me eventually. And everybody put in 1,000%. And it wouldn't have been possible unless 105 people put in 1,000%. So I asked for and received credit for organizing the team, which is what I did. And what we did was Jeff came to me and asked if it would be possible to find and recover the Apollo rocket engines that launched people to the moon. He wanted a representation of what was flown and what that achievement was and what it meant for mankind. He had watched the Apollo landings and was as a 5-year-old, as just as I had done as a 4-year-old, and it was a major moment in his life. And he felt that by doing so, we could inspire 5-year-olds. So I had two deliverables: find and recover the engines that launched men to the moon on Apollo 11 to inspire 5-year-olds. And how I did that was up to me. And who I hired was up to me. And it wasn't easy because a lot of the technology didn't exist. We had to develop the technology, so I oversaw that, and we had to renovate ships, and we had to build deep water sonar systems and test that, and deep water cameras and lights and test that, and remotely operated vehicles and test that, and all in secret. Nobody could know that they were doing it for Jeff. They worked for Dave. And if you ask me who do I work for, I would not speak to you again. So Woods Hole learned that lesson the hard way. And to put together this team, they worked for Dave. Initially, I didn't tell them what we were looking for. They thought it was Spanish galleons, and I let them believe that. And we went out, and I led the expedition, organized and led the expedition to find the Apollo rockets, because the engines are attached to the rockets, or they were. And then the expedition to do a reconnaissance, and we were going to use the Mir submersibles, and Neil Armstrong was going to come with us. And then the expedition to recover the rocket engines. Jeff wanted them from 11, but due to circumstances beyond our control, we couldn't actually identify them conclusively when we were at sea, so we recovered. We found 8 Apollo missions: Apollo 4, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13, and 16. But maybe another one in there. We recovered engines from 11, 12, 13, and 16. We found the Apollo rockets first, 14,000 feet deep, deeper than the Titanic, with new technology that we developed. The reconnaissance was canceled because the Russian government, we were going to use the Mir submersibles, and the Russians, they took them away, and Neil died that summer. And we went back in 2013 with the assets out of Norway. We developed new robots and new cameras and lights. And we refound them, and we recovered these other engines from Apollo 11. And then we put them into conservation for a number of years. And now they're on public display around the United States, and some of them are on tour. And in the Inspiring 5-Year-Olds part, Jeff, the only public appearance he did was to speak to school students. And then I did a world tour, speaking around the world to both students and audiences about what we had done to pay homage to what we believe was one of the greatest achievements in the history of the human race in a short period of time. And we never wanted to take credit for ourselves, which fit perfectly with my ethos and Jeff's. Jeff never took credit for it. And I asked for and received credit for organizing the team. I was offered the same award that was given to Bob Ballard for finding the Titanic. Bob also wasn't out there in a canoe. I turned it down. I refused it. And I said, I won't accept it personally, but I will accept it I will this going to the team. So that's what happened. It was the first team in 50 years. The last team to receive it was the 1963 American team that climbed Mount Everest, the third group to climb Everest. So when you look at that project and you look at the film Bezos Apollo YouTube, if you search Bezos Apollo on YouTube, you'll see our film that we cut when we got the awards. And nobody's identified. Nobody's identified by name, and that's the way we wanted it. When Jeff made the public announcement, we were never identified. And I'm happy with that, because if you look at the mission patch from Apollo 11, and I have one here on my desk that was a gift from the Armstrong family, it's the only mission patch from the Apollo program where the 3 astronauts are not identified on the patch. And that was because the commander, Neil Armstrong, wanted everybody to get the credit, everybody associated with the program.
You've said that solving problems is the most interesting part of what you do. Mm-hmm. Why is that?
That's where the challenge lies. Jeff came to me and asked me if it was possible to find and recover the engines that launched men to a moon on Apollo 11. Possible? Yeah, it's possible. Anything's possible. How will you do that? How would you do that? That was a longer answer. That took several months Because the reality was the technology didn't exist. It did in limited quantities, but not in one place and not commercially available and things. So we had to develop it. So those were problems that needed to be solved. A lot of problems. To get the right people, the right equipment, the right, is it legal? The answer is yes, because it's not illegal. Nobody thought of it. And so, there's always constantly these things that come up. And it's just like the Apollo program. How do we put a person from here to there? We don't even have the technology yet. When John F. Kennedy made that speech at Rice University, everything the Americans launched was blowing up on the pad. And the Russians were like, yeah, send us a postcard. And, it's this audacious challenge with the technology didn't exist, but it came together despite a tragedy that cost the lives of the astronauts on Apollo 1 and set the program back. It was achieved. And it was, interestingly, so I like problem solving, but what was interesting to me about that, I learned something very, very critical. Adventurers, right? I went from here to there and I did this. They often want to say I did this first. They missed the point, and with the Apollo program, what was interesting was Apollo 11 landed on the moon in July 1969. Apollo 12 went up and did it 4 months later in November. Tell me the names of the astronauts on Apollo 12. Who can name them? Apollo 13, they couldn't even get people to tune in to the live broadcast from space until there was this explosion that potentially could have cost the lives of the astronauts. So we know about Jim Lovell and Jack Swigert and there was a movie about it that Tom Hanks did. And so, but you can't really identify the people that followed Apollo 11. I know a lot of these guys, and then most of them are deceased now. But this was this amazing achievement, and it was something that everybody was working toward the same goal. They took the same risks. Their families made the same sacrifices, and they achieved the same thing. And often the following astronauts eclipsed what was done on Apollo 11 because they went further and they explored more and they brought back samples and they tested out space, a moon buggy and things like that. So, what was interesting about this, and this does not answer your question at all, but it's a story I want to tell, was when we debuted the engines at the Seattle Museum of Flight, when you reviewed that 2017 interview, Buzz was there, and Buzz was the only astronaut that said, "Why did you do that?" Jim Lovell and Michael Collins and Al Worden and Pete Conrad and Dick Gordon, all they understood and they thanked me for that. And most recently, the gentleman from Apollo 10 who I just talked about earlier. And I have a photo which is very special to me. It was Dick Gordon from Apollo 12. He was the command module pilot, thanking me for not forgetting about the rest of us. And somebody snapped a photo of it. And when he did so, he was wearing this gold Rolex. Okay. And it's engraved on the back, Richard Gordon, Apollo 12 with the dates of the mission. So there's an interesting story about this watch. The watch that was worn on the moon and watch that was worn in the Apollo program and Mercury and Gemini was an Omega, a Speedmaster. And this is indicative of how much people cared about the rest of the missions. Omega sponsored an astronaut appreciation dinner for the achievements of all these astronauts, but they were really just celebrating Apollo 11. And they were so conscientious about scheduling this dinner where every astronaut got a solid gold Omega Speedmaster that they scheduled it during the Apollo 12 mission.
Dear.
So the guys on Apollo 12 were in quarantine on the aircraft carrier. President Nixon calls them, and he flew all the way out to the middle of the Pacific to meet the astronauts from Apollo 11. He makes a phone call, which I have on my iPod, on my phone, to the astronauts from Apollo 12, and he can't figure out what to say. He's like, "Well, you weren't the first to walk on the moon, but you were the first to sing on the moon." Yeah.
Did he really say that?
He really said that.
Oh my
and he
gosh.
And they're like, "Yeah, Mr. President." And I kept this on my shuffle on my iPod or my phone at the time. And you were the first to hold a press conference from the moon. Yes, Mr. President. So he said, okay, well, when you get back, I want you to come to the White House, and we're going to have a barbecue. But meanwhile, the astronauts from Apollo 11 did a glory tour around the world, and so some smarty at Rolex was like, "Oh, have I got something for you?" And they gave the astronauts solid gold Rolex
Oh my
presents.
gosh.
And this is the same watch that President Johnson wore. He was the one that greenlit the whole program, and this watch cost $1,150 in 1969, and the astronauts made $18,500 before taxes.
Wow.
So Dick Gordon cherished this. He wore it for the rest of his life, and he was wearing it the night he thanked me for not forgetting about us. So I acquired it last year, and I love it. And to me, it represents that you don't have to be first. If you work hard and you achieve success, right? They did the same things, and it doesn't matter if you're famous. It doesn't matter if you get the accolades. It just doesn't matter. It's you put your nose to the grindstone and you do the best job you can, and hopefully you don't disappoint the people that are closest to you, that have the ones that have a right to have expectations, right? Your daughter or your spouse, and that's the guide. That's the North Star for me. And that's what I tell young people. That's, if I can do it and be snarky and put cartoons up on Facebook, you can too. And you don't have to listen to people who tell you that you can't. Don't let other people tell you your limitations. Don't let other people say you can't do it. Don't, if you're a paralegal at one of the opposing law firms, if you don't like what you're doing, do something else. You can. Or do something you like. If you want to go into space law, go into space law. If you want to do real estate or water rights in Idaho, I don't know why, but do that. And or teach a class, or be a writer, or be a musician. And don't just, it's because it's not the things you do that get you down, it's the things you have to put up with while you do them. So do the things you like. And that's what I learned from my background, where people were saying, you don't have a chance in this world. You should just be a plumber like your grandfather, which is fine. And, never, ever, ever aspire to own a gold Rolex that was worn by an astronaut.
Well, you have a thing about Rolexes. You are an explorer. You've been a member of the Explorers Club for many years. You were the youngest member for about 10 years.
One of.
You were on the Rolex committee. What's the significance of that?
The thing about Rolex that appeals to me is, if you look at Rolex advertising going back a century, they show explorers, athletes, people that have achieved great success. Oftentimes they wear a Rolex watch, and the message is, if you aspire to do something, you can achieve that, and you can achieve success, and this watch is a representation of that success. Now that's good marketing, but there is a truth to it, that it's as a tool, a Rolex watch is very, very reliable, and they were always expensive, but they were not unobtainable for many, many years. Now, Dick Gordon didn't have to have a gold Rolex, but he could. A lot of the Apollo astronauts wore stainless steel Rolexes, like the one on my wrist. This model in particular was favored by them because they were test pilots, and you could buy them at the PX if you were in the military, and a lot of military that were expected to perform at a high level were a reliable timepiece because it's an essential tool. And a lot of climbers did as well. And Barry Bishop, who was a photographer on the 1963 expedition that climbed Mount Everest, he was wearing his personal Rolex GMT Master that he bought when he got his first real job at National Geographic in 1959. So I was aware of this lineage growing up, and it was always something that I aspired to, and it's something that I achieved when I got my first real job. I bought my first Rolex Submariner, and I've worn them on expeditions, and as I became, if I ever had a little bit more money, I would buy an old Rolex and instead of put it in the stock market, and I eventually had a few of them, and I would always wear them on expeditions. So now that Rolex has been a sponsor of the Explorers Club since the year I became a member, they had always had a relationship with explorers going back to the 1920s. And there's a program where Rolex watches are paired with expeditions, and I lead that program, and I lead that committee, and I have since its inception. And I looked, there's watches that were given to the club by Rolex, and we matched them to expeditions, and I think it's a good homage to. They're good tools. They're still essential. I navigate with time and distance, because GPS doesn't work underwater. So I've had watches fail on me underwater, and I don't like that. Not Rolex. So I've always worn one, and boy, does this match the cliche: a lawyer who wears a Rolex and drives fast cars. It's just like fit the stereotype. But the reality is, it's something that I appreciate, and it's a history that I appreciate. And Rolex and I have this relationship where I do this for them and for the Explorers Club, and that's the bottom line. So I appreciate. They've been a very good partner.
Well, we're getting toward the end. We're not at the end yet, but we're getting there. And so what I'd like to do is name a few organizations and have you tell me about them and your involvement with them. The Sea Space Consortium.
Sea Space Symposium.
Yes, Symposium.
Founded in 1967, 68 by Werner von Braun and some leaders in oceanographic and space exploration, because there's a lot of overlap between the two. Braun was the person that was in charge of the space program under Kennedy and Johnson. He was the German brought over. His team developed Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo rockets, and so there was a recognition in the 1960s that there was a lot of overlap between space and ocean exploration. And so the Sea Space Symposium was formed by the leaders of those two genres to discuss and cooperate. And it's limited to 50 members. It's invitation only. If you have to ask, you don't belong. And we meet twice a year outside the U.S. mostly. No name tags, etc. Nothing's for attribution. And I was the youngest member of that organization for 10 years. And I took over from Kathy Sullivan, who was the first female astronaut to walk in space. And I joined in 2000, and so Scott Carpenter was a member. He was a plank holder. He was a founder. Buzz was a founder. Buzz Aldrin.
And let me remind people that he is also the astronaut that at 4 years of age you watched Walk on the Moon.
Right.
Yeah.
Buzz became a dear friend, and Guy Bluford and Kathy Sullivan and lots of shuttle astronauts, Mike Gernhardt, and the head of NASA, the head of senators and things like that, and little old me. And so we would go on dive trips, and so that's the link. And I'm proud of my membership in the Sea Space Symposium. I don't dive anymore, actually, but I do still go to the meetings. Buzz was another one of those people who was a mentor and was instrumental in my early success. And you talk about Apanga. There's a story I'd like to tell where when I was a really young member, I was in 2000. I think I was 35, and Buzz and I were in the Bahamas on a dive trip together in a remote place, and we were sitting on Apanga. It was just the two of us. And he's looking at me, and he's like, "You ought to get involved in space law." And I said, "Okay, Buzz Aldrin, how does a young lawyer become involved in space law?" Now, remember, this is 2000. This is pre-private space exploration. But it was just starting. And Buzz said, I know some people, I'll introduce you. And he did. And that's how I became the general counsel to the X Prize Foundation, which put up the $10 million cash prize for the first private space flights. And that's how I was present at the first flights of Spaceship One, and how I was standing next to Richard Branson and Paul Allen, and how I sat at the table with Elon Musk and Sergey Brin and Larry Page, and in that early 2000s and mid 2000s. And when there was an early SpaceX, an early Blue Origin, an early Scaled Composites, an early Virgin Galactic, when they were talking about this thing called private space exploration, and I was their lawyer. And it was great. I loved it. And Google had just gone public, and I'm sitting there with Larry and Sergey talking about whether or not they should buy a jet. And they're like, well, we're not really jet people. And they had, money on paper, but they didn't have the type of phenomenal wealth. And sitting with Elon and he's asking me if I'm going to Burning Man. And I don't know what Burning Man is. So my deepest conversation with Elon Musk was about Burning Man and batteries. And this is at lunch. And we take a break, and every time we had our meetings at Google headquarters, and every time I went to Google headquarters, Larry Page would give me a tour. Every time, same tour. And I would be like, Larry, how do you like afford to buy all these beanbag chairs and plush toys and everything says Google on it? Like, you must be spending every dollar you make on swag. And he was fascinated. But we would walk through and there was this in the lobby. There was a screen of a globe rotating on both sides of the screen. There was a line down the middle, and it would display every Google search happening at that exact moment as the world rotated. We were sitting there one time and standing there one time with Craig Vetter, who cracked the DNA code, me and Larry, and Sergey walks in with the Edge from U2. And he starts geeking out because, fanboying, Craig Vetter cracked the DNA code, and he's got the DNA sequencing on the wall of the studio in Dublin. And I'd sit there and be like, this is a Tuesday. This is what it looks like. And it was exciting. I like that. I really like that. I gave it up for a while because I was in a relationship with somebody that didn't want me to do all those things. And I stupidly said yes. But a couple of years later, Jeff came along and asked me to do this project to find the Apollo rocket engines, and I wisely said yes to that too. And 3 years later, I wasn't in that relationship anymore. And 4 years later, a pretty girl named Kim Frank reached out to me on that famous dating site known as LinkedIn and said, is this the Dave Concannon I knew back in the day? That's kind of the story of my life. It did not move in a linear fashion.
Wow.
Goes like this.
Of all your accomplishments, we're going to talk about your marriage to Kim in a minute, but of all your accomplishments outside of your relationship with Kim, what is the one that you're most proud of?
Being a father.
Being a father. Why?
I didn't have a father. And it was a real significant challenge that I wanted to be good at. As a kid, I'd made a promise to myself that I would be a good father. I don't know how to do it, but I was going to figure it out. And I love being a dad. I've always loved being a dad. I'm not always good at it, but I have a really close relationship with kids. And there was a rocky period in the middle because of the divorce from their mom and everything associated with that, but not anymore, not for many years. And I love being a dad. I love being a stepfather. I told Kim when we reconnected, my goal with her girls was I didn't need to be their dad. I wanted to make a positive difference in their life. And I would take the long view looking back on it and, judge myself by whether or not I could make a positive difference in their life. And how do you do that? When you show up and you're honest, then you try to see them for who they are, which is not a lesson I knew early. I saw them for who I was and how they could fit into my mold. Big mistake, huge mistake, but I fixed that. As a small boy, I made sure, I promised myself when I'm a dad, if I'm ever a father, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to try to be this person. And so far, knock on wood, I've achieved that. And
Kim talked in April about how much your relationship and your marriage means to her, and you've talked a little bit about that. I'd like to hear how your lives have been transformed.
Well, I'll tell you, Terry, never give up on your dreams. And I met a pretty girl who talked to me when I was 18 years old, and I was captivated by her, and I just thought that this person would never be with anybody but like me, and that the friendship was too valuable for me to screw it up by asking her on a date. And we went off and we were married to other people, and we made commitments to other people, and we said these things probably about other people, but in reality, for me at least, there was always a blonde in a Jeep that was always my definition of the perfect girl. And I always remembered my good friend who I adored and loved, just loved. And she moved to the West in an era before social media, and when you had to write letters, and I wrote her letters, and she saved my letters. And but life intervened, and you do these things, and you make commitments and choices and things based on the best information you have at the time. I just am so lucky to be with this person who I've always admired, who I've always seen as beautiful and funny and smart and intelligent and capable of a lot more than she thought she was. And she's an easy love. She's really simple. And I think the best part about our relationship, which is now 40 years old, is that we have this fundamental understanding of who the other person is, and this appreciation and this deep respect. I love seeing her do the things she does, because it reminds me of when she was told, you're not capable of this. When I came back into her life as just friends, I just was like saying no. When I was a kid, I would say, if you were my girlfriend, I would treat you like gold. Well, I wouldn't say it to her; I'd say it to myself. And it doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't have to be Dave Concannon and Kim Frank. In my opinion, it should be you and whoever it is that you choose to love. And I feel as though it's a simple lesson. We have 4 kids, and I tell the kids, you deserve to be with somebody who sees you for who you are and who accepts you for who you are, and you don't have to change to please them. And you're doing really stupid things like substance abuse or something like that, then you have to change. But for the most part, you should really not wear different clothes or think different things or have a different job or whatever to please someone else if they don't see you. And we're really super lucky with the 4 children that we have. We're just extremely lucky. We've had our ups and downs, as every parent does, but we're doing great as a family. And the nice thing about our family is that the definition of family is very, very broad. You can have a blended family of father, stepfather, mother, stepfather, adopted, mixed race, different circumstances, and a lot of different things. And at the end of the day, the family is who loves you and who cares about you and who appreciates you and who supports you and who sees you. And we live that every single day. And we're really, I'm very, very blessed. I really am in a good place. And this experience I had last year with Titan and things, it was an awakening for me, because I do things because I want to. And I've done things for a long time without a recognition of how that impacts other people. And so my kids, for example, so I'm supposed to be in the sub that day. And, I don't put a lot of stock in that, but others do. But I've often said, initially right after the tragedy, I've said, well, you just don't, like, who knows if I would have actually been in the sub and if I would have died that day and et cetera, et cetera. And Kim and the kids said, stop saying that. It's not true. And you know it. You would have been in the sub that day. If you had gone and you had been on the ship, there's no chance that you would not have gone on that dive. So stop saying that. Be honest with yourself and us, for our sake. But that made me think about the choices we make and the people we hurt because of the choices we make. And professionally, I see that. There's always a family. There's always a spouse. There's always a mother and father. There's always someone that has to deal with the loss, and the person that's no longer with us doesn't. And so you have to consider that. You really do. I didn't for a long time, and I do now.
Mm.
And it comes to, like seizing the day and doing the things you want to do. I think unless you're alone, you really need to think about the impact of your choices on other people. You really should. The things we do, my friends and I do, are not without substantial risk. I've lost a lot of friends. I've been with friends when they've died. I've seen people die. It's the ultimate bet that you can make is betting your life on something. And sometimes you lose that bet. And so we talk about it. We've PH Narsley took my seat in the sub, and I talked to PH at length about the safety of Titan and what would happen and what risks we were willing to accept and whether or not it was safe. And it's not safe. It never was safe. We always knew it wasn't safe. Nobody with two connecting neurons could think it was safe. But whether it was a risk we were willing to accept. And PDH said to me, he had lost his wife to breast cancer. And he said, I don't want to die in a hospital bed like my wife. And so you have to accept that. That's he was remarried though. And so, but that was how he felt. And you have to appreciate that. I mean, we all make decisions that, for one reason or another, how we rationalize our decisions. Remember when Jeff announced that we had found the Apollo rockets, my 15-year-old son at the time said, "Congratulations, Dad. You finally did something that matters."
Ooh.
I've been to
Wow.
the Titanic 3 times. You've met Bob Ballard and Don Walsh and Buzz Aldrin, and I finally did something that matters.
Wow.
Would you care to elaborate? And he said, yeah, you're finally associated with a triumph instead of a tragedy.
Ooh.
And it made perfect sense.
There's some truth to that. Lots of truth to that. Yeah. Well, so looking back over your life, and you're still a relatively young man.
Yeah.
There's lots ahead of you. But you have come from a place that you wouldn't have wanted to be to a place that must fill you with, Kim and I talked about, so much joy, so much. You have accomplished so much, but you're still young. What's next?
I don't know. And the reality is, Terry, I don't know and I don't want to know. I don't need to know. I have gone through a period lately because of current events where I've really taken a hard look at what it is I do. And, like, I don't need more texts like the one I received the day I arrived in France, but I still got 2 more of them within 4 weeks. And I'll get another one today because it's after a weekend. It's a promise you. I'll get another one before today or tomorrow. If I look at my phone right now, I don't need that to make my life complete. I've really narrowed my focus to doing things that I know make a difference. And whether that's taking care of this 14-year-old dog that's been with me for a quarter of my life, that's been so wonderful, and he doesn't have years, he has months, to speaking to 20,000 kids in Norway in 2 stadiums in September, which I'm looking forward to. My wife is overseas at the moment. She comes home in 2 days. She's doing an amazing project that I'm really proud of her for doing, and I've been helping her with that and try to help her bring that home. But I don't need to lead another expedition. I think you have to have it all in the right perspective. I think you have to realize that you're not that special. And it's funny because I was invited to a closed door, open, invitation only luncheon with Sir Edmund Hillary. Household names in exploration, and there were only 30 of us. And you would recognize every one of the people there, every single one. And I remember Sir Edmund was standing at the podium in this small room, and he waited for the wait staff to leave and the door to close. So it's just us. And he said, he looked around the room and he said, I only have one thing to say. Get over yourselves. Get over yourselves. You're not that special. We all know that the reason we're sitting in this room and people know our names is because the weather was bad for the guy the day before, or 100,000 people put you on top of that rocket, or some other circumstance smiled upon you so that you could achieve what it is that put you in this room and allowed people to know your name. But get over yourselves. And what you need to do is you need to, in my opinion, you need to do things that make that better for the rest of the world. You need to use whatever notoriety you have to make it good for the rest of the world. He said, look, I was knighted by the Queen. I'm not British. I'm a beekeeper from New Zealand, and I'm not an Anglophile. And I did everything possible to shake off that knighthood. But then I realized after my wife and my daughter died in a plane crash, I realized that I could use it for good, and I could use it to build schools, and I could use it to help other people. And that really is what fulfills me. The stepdaughter of Dick Gordon has reached out to me. She's very happy I have this watch. She said that she really didn't like when her mother married Dick Gordon. She was really not nice. But then he came to become a very special person in her life, and she wrote a book about it. And she said, I'm really glad you have that watch, because what it represents to me is the significance of his accomplishment. And he cherished it. And she sent me a photograph of when they were moving from Texas to California, and the sun was coming up, and he's driving the car, and you can see the watch on his wrist. And she said, it's really special to me that somebody appreciates it and appreciates his accomplishment, appreciates something that he took for granted, because he was just the guy my mother married, and I really hated him for a long time, but he really made a big difference. Your podcast, the reason why I was eager to come on was because you're talking about seize the day and step outside your comfort zone and really try new things and don't be the person that somebody tells you can't be. Really, why not? Like I said, ask yourself, not why not why. You'd be astonished at what you can accomplish. And you really, in my opinion, you need to measure yourself with small steps. Whose life can you change? One. If I keep one kid from becoming a lawyer, when I talk to 20,000 kids, I've done my good deed for the day. It's really simple. But you don't have to be liked. You don't have to be understood. You don't have to be first. You don't have to be wealthy. You don't have to be. None of those things really matter. There was a curmudgeon who was recently divorced and was pissed off that the Apollo program was canceled, who came to my school and said what he said. I don't advise that. I'd rather be the curmudgeon who's recently married after recently divorced, who understands, who appreciates what he has. That to me is the message, and I think that's the message that you're sharing with your listeners, and it's the message that I took away from Tim Cahill, and it's the message that I took away from Wayne King and Bill Byer and Judge Bechtel, it really is important. Well, I think what you're doing is super, super important, and just to the people that are watching this, they're not going to know me. They don't need to look me up. They don't need to see the list of things. That and $4 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. It really is insignificant. But what matters is knowing that you're capable of doing a lot more than you think you are. You really are. If you just don't sit in the problem, you really can achieve the things that you set out to do. And if you are so inclined, you can make a positive difference in someone else's life, which is something you can't quantify and you can't put a price on, and but it really has a lot of value.
You've said that you have no desire to write a book.
Right.
I'd like I would like you to rethink that just from the standpoint, not of having written a book, but from the people you could reach with that message. And I will leave it there. You don't have to respond, but I would encourage that that would be one of the things you would take up next. The other thing I want to acknowledge is not only deep gratitude for the time that you've spent talking to us about this. I, in no way, would take anything away from you or the things you've accomplished or the heights you've reached or the people that you know. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that I personally see the hand of God all over your life. They say that success is, what is it, opportunity meeting hard work. And I so see that about you and your life. I think people will be really moved by the time they spend with you, and hopefully, literally, physically, emotionally, mentally, whatever moves them, they will be moved as a result of this. And so, David, thank you. Thank you so much for this time.
It's hard for me to hear and accept that, Terry. It really is, but I appreciate that sentiment, and I hope, again, I don't know. I am fortunate. I've succeeded in spite of myself. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of scars to show for it. But I also feel like you get this wisdom after a certain period of time, and you can keep it in or you can share it. I don't know, the book thing. I can do a sprint like this for 2 hours and talk about it, but I don't want to sit down and write about myself. And I don't, you've touched on things in my life that I don't talk about. I don't share. I just don't. I didn't choose those things, and I wouldn't choose those things. But boy, do I know I don't know millions of people, but I know a lot of people who are in the same circumstances. And I know a lot of people who will believe what people tell them about themselves. And I know a lot of people who've given up, and a lot of people who had a lot of potential that never realized it because they believed what other people told them. And to me, that's a sad thing. That's really, really sad. I really feel like sadly, there are not a lot of people that want to make a difference. I mean, I'll tell you, we're kind of at the tail end of this, but I'll tell you something. Like, I don't take a nickel to talk to kids. I'll travel to Norway on my own expense, and I'll talk to kids. But I was asked 2 years ago to do a presentation. I don't like to talk to adults, but I do. And I was paid an extraordinary amount of money, an obscene amount of money, to come to Las Vegas and speak to a group. And I only did it as a favor for someone. But there was a caveat. I accepted this obscene honorarium, a stunning amount per minute, on the condition that they give it to a charity in rural Idaho that that provides mental health services for victims of sexual assault.
Wow.
Now, I don't know this charity, and they don't know me, but I like what they do, and I looked at their 990s and stuff. So here, I went to Las Vegas to do something I don't want to do. I hate Las Vegas. I hate it. I went to a place I don't like to do something I don't want to do, on the condition that it went to a charity that doesn't know anything about me. And I'm sure they got the check and said, "Huh?
What is this?
What is this?"
Yeah.
But I was really happy about it because I could be creative in my kindness.
Yes.
And I really enjoyed that. I got a huge kick out of it. And for as much as I hate Las Vegas, I really liked the group. They were nice people. But as much as I despise Las Vegas, I was kind of happy to be there because I know that money went a long way. I know it made a difference. And in a place that wouldn't ordinarily get that attention. It was worth it. It was really worth it. And but again, the takeaway, please. The takeaway is not this guy had a tough life and now he has a Rolex.
Right.
It's
if Dave can do it, we can too.
Right. And thank you to Tim.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Next time you guys get to Boise, invitation is always open to spend time with us, sit on the porch with the bourbon. That would be really fun and continue the conversation.
Definitely.
But you just make it a good evening, love on the dog, and say hi to Kim when she gets back.
2 days. So we're here in 2 days.
2 days. Great.
2 days. It's been
Great.
2 months, but it's been 2 days.
Well,
Looking forward to it. All right. Thanks, Tara. I'll see you soon.
Thank
We
you.
will see you soon. I'm certain of it.
we've been talking with David Concannon, an accomplished, humble, kind man who hasn't shrunk back from embracing new roles. He's a man who lives his passion, and he encourages us to do likewise. This is Terry Murison at www.terrysdoingit.com. That's a new address. Until next time, don't just think about it. Get out and do it. Bye-bye.